The horse bolted past the schoolhouse just as Mirabelle Mercer stepped into the street. And she had exactly 1 second to recognize the man clinging to the saddle horn before his weight shifted wrong and he started to fall. She didn't think. She ran straight into the animal's path, grabbing the loose rein as 1,500 pounds of panicked horseflesh nearly knocked her flat. The gelding wheeled, foam flying from its bit, and the man hit the ground hard enough to knock the wind from his chest. Mirabelle held the rein with both hands, her boots digging furrows in the dust as she talked the horse down from its terror. Her heart slammed against her ribs. The animal finally stilled, sides heaving, and she risked a glance at the man sprawling in the street behind her. He pushed himself up on one elbow, dark eyes finding hers with a sharpness that stopped her breath. Dirt streaked his jaw. Blood welled from a split along his knuckles. He looked like trouble, like danger, like every reason she'd come to Eagle Ridge to disappear. "Are you hurt?" she asked, and her voice came out steadier than she felt. He got to his feet in one smooth motion despite the fall. No thanks to that damn animal. His gaze moved from her face to the horse, then back again, slower this time. "You always jump in front of runaway horses, miss?" "Only when the rider looks like he's about to break his neck," Mirabelle said. She kept her tone light, but her pulse hadn't settled. Something about the way he looked at her made her feel seen in a way she couldn't afford. He took the rein from her hand, his fingers brushing hers for half a heartbeat. The contact sent a jolt straight through her chest. "I'm obliged," he said quietly. "Name's Mercer Granger." The name hit her like cold water. She knew that name. Everyone in Eagle Ridge knew that name. Mercer Granger, the rancher accused of sabotaging irrigation ditches up at Red Mesa Ranch. Mercer Granger, the man half the town wanted to see hang. "Mirabelle Mercer," she said, because lying about her name would only make things worse if someone overheard. She stepped back, putting distance between them, even though part of her wanted to stay close enough to see if that intensity in his eyes was real, or just a trick of the light. "Mercer," he repeated, and one corner of his mouth lifted in something that wasn't quite a smile. "Any relation to the Mercers out of Kansas?" Her blood turned to ice. "No," she said too quickly. "I'm from Ohio." His gaze sharpened, and she knew he'd heard the lie in her voice. But he didn't push. He just nodded once, adjusted his grip on the rein, and swung back into the saddle with the ease of a man who'd been riding since before he could walk. "Much obliged, Miss Mercer," he said again. Then he turned the horse and rode off toward the edge of town, leaving her standing in the street with her heart racing and the sick certainty that she'd just made a terrible mistake. Mirabelle forced herself to walk back to the schoolhouse as if nothing had happened. But her hands shook as she pushed open the door, and when she caught her reflection in the window glass, she saw the flush still burning in her cheeks. She'd come to Eagle Ridge to hide, to bury Mirabelle Mercer from Kansas and become someone new. Someone with no ties to the outlaw family that had destroyed everything she'd tried to build. For 2 years, she'd kept her head down, taught her students, and stayed far away from trouble. And now she'd just rescued the most dangerous man in town. The trouble found her again 3 days later. Mirabelle was walking back from the general store, arms full of supplies for the school, when she heard the shouting. A crowd had gathered outside the land office, and she knew better than to stop, but the voice cutting through the noise made her freeze in place. "That's a lie and you know it," Mercer Granger said, his tone hard as iron. "I never touched those ditches." "You were seen," another man shot back. His voice was smoother, colder. 3 witnesses put you at the north boundary the night the water got diverted. Mirabelle's stomach dropped. She should keep walking. She should go straight to the schoolhouse and lock the door and pretend she'd never heard Mercer's name. But her feet carried her toward the crowd instead, and before she could stop herself, she was pushing through to the front. Mercer stood on the boardwalk outside the land office, facing down a man in an expensive suit. The suited man had to be Richard Crane, the lawyer who'd been buying up water rights all through the valley. Half the ranchers in Eagle Ridge hated him. The other half owed him money. "Where's your proof?" Mercer demanded. "Show me one shred of real evidence." "I don't need proof for a citizen's hearing," Crane said smoothly. "I just need concern for the public good. And right now, Mr. Granger, the public is very concerned about your interference with lawful water distribution." Mercer's jaw tightened. His gaze swept the crowd, and for one terrible moment, his eyes locked with Mirabelle's. She saw recognition flare in his expression, followed by something darker. Confusion, maybe. Or warning. "This is a setup," he said, still looking at her. "Someone's trying to take my land, and they're using the water rights as an excuse." "That's a serious accusation," Crane said. "Do you have proof?" Mercer dragged his gaze away from Mirabelle and turned back to Crane. "Not yet, but I will." "Then I suggest you find it quickly," Crane said. "The hearing is set for next week. If you can't provide an alibi or evidence of your innocence, the council will have no choice but to rule in favor of seizure." The crowd started to break up, voices rising in argument and speculation. Mirabelle knew she should leave. But when Mercer stepped down from the boardwalk and started to walk past her, she heard herself speak. "I believe you," she said quietly. He stopped, turned, looked at her with that same sharp intensity that had shaken her 3 days ago. "Why?" "Because I know what it looks like when someone's been framed," she said before she could think better of it. His expression shifted. Something in his eyes gentled, but the danger didn't leave. "You shouldn't get involved in this, Miss Mercer." "Maybe not," she said. "But I already am." She didn't understand why she said it. Didn't understand why this man, this stranger with a reputation for violence and a name tangled up in water disputes, made her want to step closer instead of running the other way. But loneliness, recognized loneliness, and she'd seen it in his face the moment he looked at her in that dusty street. "Meet me at Red Mesa Ranch tomorrow," Mercer said quietly. "Sunset. If you mean what you said." Then he walked away before she could answer, and Mirabelle stood there with her heart pounding and her arms full of school books, knowing she'd just crossed a line she could never uncross. That night, she lay awake in her small room above the schoolhouse and tried to convince herself not to go. Mercer Granger was accused of sabotage. He was dangerous. He was exactly the kind of trouble she'd spent 2 years avoiding. But she kept seeing the look in his eyes when he'd said, "Someone's trying to take my land." She kept hearing the edge in his voice when he'd warned her away. And she kept remembering the way his fingers had brushed hers when he took the rein, and the way that one moment of contact had made her feel more alive than she'd felt in 2 years of hiding. She went. The ride out to Red Mesa Ranch took an hour, and by the time Mirabelle arrived, the sun was sinking toward the horizon in a blaze of orange and gold. The ranch sat in a valley between 2 red rock mesas, with a main house, a barn, and a scattering of outbuildings clustered around a creek that ran clear and cold from the mountains. Mercer was waiting by the barn. He'd cleaned up since yesterday, shaved, changed into a fresh shirt. but the tension in his shoulders hadn't eased. When he saw her riding up the path, he walked out to meet her, his expression unreadable. "You came," he said. "You asked?" Mirabel replied. She dismounted, suddenly aware of how isolated they were. No one knew she'd come here. No one would hear her if she called for help. But she didn't feel afraid. She felt something else entirely. "I need to show you something," Mercer said. He gestured toward the creek. "This is what they're fighting over." They walked together along the bank, and he pointed out the irrigation channels he'd dug, the network of ditches that carried water to his fields and his neighbor's land downstream. "Someone cut through here 2 weeks ago," he said. "Diverted half the flow into a gully that goes nowhere. Wrecked 3 days of work, and cost my neighbor his early wheat." "And they're saying you did it," Mirabel said. "Yeah." He crouched down by the damaged ditch, ran his hand along the torn earth. "But look at this." The cut was made with a narrow spade, clean and fast. "I use a wide-blade shovel for ditch work. Different tool, different technique. Can you prove it?" she asked. "Not unless I can find the spade that made the cut," he said. "And I doubt whoever did this was careless enough to leave it lying around." He stood, brushed the dirt from his hands, and looked at her with that intensity that made her chest tighten. "Why are you helping me, Miss Mercer?" "Because I know what it's like to be accused of something you didn't do," she said, quietly. "Because I know what it's like when no one believes you." His gaze held hers. "What were you accused of?" The question hung between them, sharp and dangerous. Mirabel felt the weight of her secret pressing against her ribs. The truth she'd run 1,000 miles to escape. She could lie. She could walk away. She could keep herself safe. But something about the way Mercer looked at her, the way he stood there, with his defenses down and his future hanging by a thread, made her want to be honest for the first time in 2 years. "My family," she said slowly. "Back in Kansas. They were outlaws, rustlers mostly, but they ran with worse men. I didn't know until the marshal came. I thought they were just working hard and keeping to themselves. But when the truth came out, everyone assumed I was part of it. They said I must have known. They said I helped." "Did you?" Mercer asked, and his voice held no judgment, only quiet curiosity. "No," Mirabel said. "But it didn't matter. Once people decide you're guilty, evidence doesn't change their minds. So I left. I came here, and I became someone else. Someone with no past and no ties. And I've spent 2 years trying to believe that was enough." Mercer was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "You think that's what I'm doing? Trying to be someone else?" "I think you're trying to hold on to something that's yours," Mirabel said. "And I think someone wants to take it from you, and they don't care how many lies they have to tell." He took a step closer. The sunset light caught the edges of his face, turned his eyes to amber. "You're not afraid of me," he said. "Everyone else in town looks at me like I'm a wolf in their henhouse. But not you." "I'm terrified of you," Mirabel said honestly. "But not because I think you're guilty." "Then why?" he asked, and his voice dropped to something rougher, something that sent heat coiling through her chest. "Because you make me want to stop hiding," she said. "And that's the most dangerous thing I can imagine." The silence between them stretched taut. Mercer lifted one hand, hesitated, then brushed a loose strand of hair back from her face. with a gentleness that didn't match the danger in his eyes. "If you're going to be afraid," he said quietly, "be afraid of this. Be afraid of what happens if I start believing you're real." "I am real," Mirabelle whispered. "Then God help us both," Mercer said, and he leaned in and kissed her. The kiss was slow and careful and devastating. Mirabelle felt the world tilt, felt 2 years of loneliness crack open like a dam breaking. She kissed him back without thinking, her hands fisting in his shirt. And for one perfect moment, nothing else existed but the heat of his mouth and the solid strength of his body and the way he held her like she was something precious. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathing hard. Mercer rested his forehead against hers, his hands framing her face, and said, "This is a bad idea." "Probably," Mirabelle agreed. But she didn't let go. They stayed like that until the light began to fail. Then Mercer walked her back to her horse, his hand warm and steady at the small of her back, and helped her into the saddle with a lingering touch that promised more. "Be careful riding back," he said. "And Miss Mercer, thank you for believing me." Mirabelle looked down at him, at the man the town wanted to destroy, and felt something fierce and protective rise in her chest. "I'll find a way to help you," she said. "I promise." She rode back to Eagle Ridge in the gathering dark, her lips still tingling from his kiss, her heart full of something she'd thought she'd lost forever. Hope. But hope was dangerous. And the next morning, when she arrived at the schoolhouse, she found Richard Crane waiting for her on the front step. "Miss Mercer," Crane said pleasantly. "Might I have a word?" Mirabelle's stomach clenched. She kept her expression neutral and gestured toward the door. "Of course. But I have students arriving soon." "This won't take long," Crane said. He followed her inside, and she didn't miss the way his gaze swept the small room, cataloging everything. "You've done well for yourself here," he said. "It's not easy for a single woman to establish herself in a frontier town." "I've been fortunate," Mirabelle said carefully. "The community has been welcoming." "Indeed," Crane said. "Which is why I thought you should know that your association with Mercer Granger is causing some concern." Her blood ran cold, but she kept her voice steady. "I don't have an association with Mr. Granger." "You were seen at his ranch yesterday evening," Crane said. He smiled, but there was nothing warm in it. "Small towns have sharp eyes, Miss Mercer. And when a respectable school teacher involves herself with an accused criminal, people begin to ask questions. They begin to wonder what she might be hiding." The threat was clear as daylight. Mirabelle felt her hands curl into fists at her sides. "Mr. Granger saved me from a dangerous situation last week," she said. "I was simply expressing my gratitude." "Of course," Crane said smoothly. "And I'm sure that's all it was. But appearances matter, Miss Mercer. Especially for someone in your position. Especially for someone with a past they'd rather keep private." The room seemed to shrink. Mirabelle's pulse hammered in her throat. "What do you want?" she asked quietly. "Only your cooperation," Crane said. "Mr. Granger is a dangerous man who has been interfering with the lawful distribution of water rights in this valley. If he has contacted you, if he has tried to influence you or gain your sympathy, I need to know. For the good of the community." "He hasn't," Mirabelle lied. "And even if he had, I wouldn't betray a confidence." Crane's smile faded. "That's disappointing, Miss Mercer. I'd hoped you would be more reasonable." He moved toward the door, then paused. "You should think carefully about where your loyalties lie. This town has been good to you. It would be a shame if that changed, because you chose the wrong side." He left, and Mirabelle sank into her chair, shaking. Crane knew. Maybe not everything, but enough. Enough to destroy her if she didn't cooperate. She thought about Mercer, about the way he'd kissed her by the creek, about the promise she'd made to help him. She thought about the life she'd built in Eagle Ridge, fragile and precious, and one wrong word away from collapse. And she thought about what her father would have said. Her outlaw father, the man who'd chosen crime over family and left her to face the consequences alone. He would have told her to run, to save herself, to let Mercer Granger hang if that's what it took to keep her secret safe. But Mirabelle wasn't her father, and she wasn't going to run. Not this time. She spent the morning teaching her students, but her mind raced the whole time. Crane had witnesses who claimed they'd seen Mercer at the north boundary the night the ditches were sabotaged. If those witnesses were lying, she needed proof. And if they were telling the truth, she needed to find out who'd actually done the damage. By the time school let out, she had a plan. It was risky and probably foolish, but it was the only move she could see. She rode out to Red Mesa Ranch again that evening, and this time, Mercer met her at the edge of his property, with worry written all over his face. "You shouldn't be here," he said. "Crane's got people watching." "I know," Mirabelle said. "He came to see me this morning. Threatened to expose my past if I didn't cooperate." Mercer's expression went dark. "That son of a..." He bit off the curse and took a breath. "You need to stay away from me. I won't let him use you as leverage." "It's too late for that," Mirabelle said. She dismounted and walked up to him, close enough to see the frustration and fear warring in his eyes. "He already knows we've been in contact. The only way forward is to prove you're innocent before the hearing." "How?" Mercer demanded. "I've been over every inch of this property. I've talked to every hand who works for me. No one saw anything unusual that night." "Then, we need to talk to the witnesses," Mirabelle said. "Find out what they really saw, or what they were paid to say." Mercer stared at her. "You want to go question Crane's witnesses?" "Mirabelle, that's dangerous. More dangerous than letting them put a rope around your neck?" She shot back. He didn't have an answer for that. They worked through the evening, planning their approach. The three witnesses were all men who worked on neighboring ranches. Men who had reason to resent Mercer's success and water access. But they were also men with families. Men who might crack under pressure if confronted with inconsistencies in their stories. The storm rolled in just after midnight, a wall of wind and dust that turned the sky black and sent everything not nailed down tumbling across the yard. Mercer pulled Mirabelle into the barn as the first gust hit, and they stood together in the doorway, watching the world disappear into chaos. "We're not riding back in this," Mercer said. "You'll have to wait it out here." Mirabelle nodded, too shaken by the sudden violence of the storm to argue. They moved deeper into the barn, and Mercer lit a lantern that cast flickering shadows across the stalls. His horses stamped and snorted, spooked by the wind, and one of them, a young mare, was bleeding from a gash along her shoulder where something had struck her. Mercer swore under his breath and moved to the mare's stall. "Easy, girl. Easy." He grabbed a clean cloth and pressed it to the wound, but the mare tossed her head, eyes rolling white with fear. "Let me help," Mirabelle said. She slipped into the stall beside him, her voice low and soothing. "Hey now. You're all right. We've got you." The mare's ears flicked toward her. Mirabelle kept talking, kept her movements slow and gentle. And after a moment, the animal settled enough for Mercer to clean and bandage the wound properly. They worked in silence, their hands brushing as they passed supplies back and forth. And by the time the mare was calm and the bleeding had stopped, the storm outside had reached a full howl. "You're good with her," Mercer said quietly. "I grew up around horses," Mirabelle said. "Before everything fell apart, my father kept a small stable. I used to spend hours out there, just being with them. They didn't care who my family was or what people said about us." Mercer was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You loved him. Your father." "I did," Mirabelle said. "Even after I found out what he'd done, even after he destroyed my life, I still loved him. And that's the part that hurts the most." She felt Mercer's hand cover hers where it rested on the mare's neck. "I'm sorry," he said. "For all of it." Mirabelle turned to look at him, and in the lantern light, his face was open in a way she hadn't seen before. Vulnerable. Real. "Why are you fighting so hard for this ranch?" she asked. "It's just land. You could walk away, start over somewhere else." "Because it's mine," Mercer said simply. "My father built this place from nothing. He died defending it from claim jumpers when I was 16, and I swore I'd hold it no matter what. This land is the only thing I've ever had that's worth protecting." He paused. Until now. The words hung between them, weighted with meaning. Mirabelle's breath caught. "Mercer," she started. "I know it's too soon," he said. "I know we barely know each other. But Mirabelle, when I look at you, I don't see a woman running from her past. I see someone brave enough to stand up and fight when it would be easier to disappear. And that's worth protecting too." She kissed him then, there in the lantern light with the storm raging outside and a wounded horse breathing softly beside them. She kissed him like he was air and she'd been drowning. And when he pulled her close, she felt the last of her defenses crumble. They stayed in the barn until dawn, talking and planning and stealing kisses between moments of strategy. By the time the storm blew itself out, Mirabelle knew two things with absolute certainty. She was in love with Mercer Granger, and she was going to do whatever it took to save him. The damage from the storm was worse than either of them had expected. The main irrigation channel had been torn open. Half the fencing along the north boundary was down, and part of the barn roof had collapsed, crushing a wagon and scattering tools and supplies across the yard. Mercer stood in the wreckage, his face gray with exhaustion and fury. 3 weeks of work, he said. Gone. And the hearing is in 4 days. Then we work fast, Mirabelle said. She rolled up her sleeves. Tell me what needs doing first. They worked side by side all morning, clearing debris and salvaging what they could. By noon, 2 of Mercer's ranch hands had arrived to help, and by evening, they'd managed to patch the worst of the damage. But the destruction had cost time they didn't have, and Mirabelle could see the defeat settling into Mercer's shoulders. That night, she rode into town with a plan forming in her mind. If she couldn't prove Mercer's innocence through the witnesses, she'd have to find the evidence herself. And the only place that evidence could be was in Crane's office. Breaking into Crane's office was the stupidest thing Mirabelle had ever considered doing. It was also the only option left. She waited until after midnight, then slipped through the shadows to the land office. The lock was simple, and she'd learned a few things from her outlaw family that she'd never thought she'd use. The door opened with a quiet click, and she was inside. Crane's office was neat and organized. every paper filed with precision. Mirabel lit a small candle and started searching. She found contracts, land deeds, water rights transfers, but nothing that pointed directly to Mercer's case. Then, she opened the bottom drawer of Crane's desk and found a ledger. The entries were coded, but the pattern was clear enough. Payments to 3 men, dated the week of the sabotage. Payments labeled consultation fees, but the amounts were far too large for simple advice. And next to the final entry, a note in Crane's handwriting: witnesses secured. Mirabel's hands shook as she copied the relevant pages into her notebook. This was it. This was the proof that Crane had paid men to frame Mercer. She was sliding the ledger back into the drawer when she heard footsteps outside. Panic shot through her chest. She blew out the candle and dove behind Crane's desk just as the door opened. Light spilled into the room, and she pressed herself flat against the wall, heart hammering so loud she was sure whoever had entered could hear it. "I know you're in here," Crane's voice said calmly, "and I know what you found." Mirabel didn't move, didn't breathe. "Come out, Miss Mercer," Crane said, "or I'll call the sheriff and have you arrested for breaking and entering." I imagine that would be very interesting for someone trying so hard to keep a low profile. She stood slowly, hands raised. Crane stood in the doorway, a pistol held loosely at his side. He didn't look angry. He looked almost amused. "You're more resourceful than I expected," he said. "I'll give you that. But it doesn't matter. That ledger won't help you." Those payments were perfectly legal consulting fees, and any suggestion otherwise is pure speculation. 3 men with no connection to each other all happened to witness the same crime on the same night. Mirabel said, "That's not speculation. That's conspiracy." "Prove it," Crane said. "Take it to the sheriff. See if he believes the word of a schoolteacher with a criminal family over mine." He smiled. "You've lost, Miss Mercer. And so is Granger. The only question now is whether you walk away quietly, or whether I have to destroy you too." Mirabel felt the weight of her notebook in her pocket, the copied pages that were her only proof. She felt the fear clawing at her throat, the old instinct to run, to disappear, to save herself at any cost. But she also felt something else, something fierce and stubborn and new. "No," she said. Crane's smile faded. "Excuse me? I'm not walking away," Mirabel said. "And you're not going to destroy me." She took a step forward, her voice steady despite her racing pulse. "Because if you try, I'll make sure everyone in this town knows exactly what's in that ledger. I'll stand up in front of the council and tell them how you paid witnesses to frame an innocent man. And even if they don't believe me, even if you ruin me in the process, people will remember. They'll ask questions. And sooner or later, someone will dig deep enough to find the truth." Crane's hand tightened on the pistol. "You're bluffing." "Maybe," Mirabel said. "But are you willing to take that risk?" The silence stretched between them, taut as a wire. Then Crane lowered the gun and stepped aside. "Get out," he said quietly. "And don't come back." Mirabel walked past him on shaking legs, forcing herself to move slowly, to not run. She made it outside, made it to her horse, made it halfway to Red Mesa Ranch before the terror caught up with her, and she had to stop and lean against a tree, gasping for breath. She'd done it. She had proof. But she also knew that Crane wasn't going to let this go quietly. The hearing was in 3 days, and between now and then, he'd be working to discredit her, to turn the town against her, to make sure that even if she spoke up, no one would listen. She needed help. She needed someone with authority, someone Crane couldn't easily intimidate. She needed the sheriff. The problem was, the sheriff was Crane's friend. Mercer listened to her story the next morning, with his jaw clenched so tight, she thought he might crack a tooth. When she finished, he paced the length of his porch twice, then stopped in front of her. "You could have been killed," he said. "But I wasn't," Mirabelle replied. "And now, we have proof. Proof that Crane will say is speculation," Mercer said. "Mirabelle, this isn't enough. Not without a witness willing to break ranks and testify against him." "Then we find one," Mirabelle said. "We go to the 3 men he paid. We show them the ledger. We tell them that if they come clean now, they might get leniency. But if they stay quiet and the truth comes out later, they'll go down with Crane." Mercer looked at her, and something in his expression made her chest tighten. "You're not going to let this go, are you?" "No," Mirabelle said. "I'm not." He pulled her into his arms, and she felt the tension in his body, the fear and frustration, and something deeper. "I don't deserve you," he said roughly. "That's not your decision to make," Mirabelle said against his chest. They rode out to the first witness's ranch that afternoon. The man's name was Tom Baker, and he worked a small spread 5 miles east of Red Mesa. When they arrived, he was repairing a fence, and the look on his face when he saw Mercer told Mirabelle everything she needed to know. Baker knew he'd lied, and he wasn't proud of it. "We need to talk," Mercer said without preamble. "Got nothing to say to you," Baker muttered, not meeting his eyes. Mirabelle dismounted and walked up to him, her notebook open in her hands. "Mr. Baker, we know Richard Crane paid you to testify against Mr. Granger. We have proof. The question is whether you're willing to make this right before you end up charged as an accessory." Baker's face went white. He glanced from her to Mercer, then back again. I didn't want to," he stammered. "But Crane said he'd foreclose on my loan if I didn't cooperate. He said no one would get hurt, that it was just about water rights." "A man could hang for sabotage," Mercer said quietly. "How is that not getting hurt?" Baker flinched. I know. God. I've barely slept since that meeting." He dropped the fence post he'd been holding. "What do you want from me?" "The truth," Mirabelle said. "In front of the council. Before the hearing." Baker was silent for a long moment. Then he nodded. "All right. I'll do it. But Crane's going to come after me." "Let him try," Mercer said. They got similar confessions from the other 2 witnesses over the next day and a half. By the time the hearing arrived, they had 3 men willing to testify that Crane had coerced their statements, and Mirabelle's copied ledger pages to back it up. But the morning of the hearing, word reached Red Mesa Ranch that Crane had moved the proceedings up by 6 hours, and that he'd convinced the council to issue an arrest warrant for Mercer, effective immediately. "We don't have time to ride in and present the evidence," Mercer said, staring at the warrant notice. "By the time we get there, they'll have me in custody." "Then we ride fast," Mirabelle said. "And we bring Baker and the others with us. Crane can't proceed if his witnesses recant in public." "He can if I'm already in a cell," Mercer said. "Or worse." The word hung between them. Worse. A rope. a tree. Frontier justice, swift and brutal. Mirabelle felt cold terror wash through her, but she pushed it down. "We're not letting that happen," she said. "We ride now, we ride hard, and we get there before they can move against you." Mercer looked at her, and she saw the fear in his eyes, the knowledge that this might be the last time they stood together like this. "If this goes wrong," he started. "It won't," Mirabelle said fiercely. "I didn't fall in love with you just to watch them hang you for a crime you didn't commit." The words were out before she could stop them, raw and honest and terrifying. Mercer's expression shattered and reformed into something so intense it took her breath away. "Say that again," he said. "I love you," Mirabelle whispered. "And we're going to win this." He kissed her hard, desperate, then pulled back and grabbed her hand. "Let's ride." They gathered Baker and the other 2 witnesses and rode for Eagle Ridge at a pace that left the horses lathered and blowing. Mirabelle's heart hammered the entire way, her mind racing through everything that could go wrong. Crane could have armed men waiting. The council could refuse to hear their evidence. The town could turn on them. But they couldn't stop. They had to try. They reached Eagle Ridge an hour before sunset and found a crowd gathered outside the land office. The hearing was already underway. And standing on the steps with the sheriff at his side, Richard Crane looked every inch the righteous citizen protecting his town. The crowd parted as Mercer rode straight up to the steps. Crane's expression flickered with surprise, then smoothed into cold control. "Mr. Granger," he said loudly. "How convenient. The council has just voted to issue an immediate arrest warrant." "Sheriff, if you'd be so kind." The sheriff moved forward, hand on his pistol, but Mercer didn't dismount. "I have new evidence," he said, his voice carrying across the crowd. "Evidence that proves my innocence and Mr. Crane's involvement in framing me." "That's a serious accusation," the council head said from the doorway. "And I can prove it," Mercer said. He looked at Baker. "Tom?" Baker dismounted on shaking legs and walked up to the steps. "I lied," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Mr. Crane paid me to say I saw Mercer at the north boundary that night. He paid all 3 of us. And I've got proof." The crowd erupted. Crane's face went dark. "That's absurd," he said. "This man is clearly trying to save himself from perjury charges." "Then explain this," Mirabelle said. She dismounted and pushed through to the steps, her notebook open. She held up the copied ledger pages. "These are from Mr. Crane's personal records. Payments to 3 men, dated the week of the sabotage, labeled consultation fees." She looked directly at the council head. "Consultation fees large enough to buy a small ranch. For what service, exactly?" The council head took the pages, his expression grim. He glanced at Crane. "Is this accurate?" "Those records were obtained illegally," Crane said, his voice sharp. "Miss Mercer broke into my office and stole private documents. She should be arrested, not listened to." "Then arrest me," Mirabelle said. "But first, let the council hear from the witnesses. Let them explain exactly what Mr. Crane asked them to do." The silence was deafening. Then Baker stepped forward again, and the other 2 witnesses joined him, and one by one, they told the truth. By the time they finished, the crowd was shouting for Crane's head. The sheriff looked pale, the council head looked furious, and Crane looked cornered. "This hearing is adjourned," the council head said. "Mr. Crane, you'll answer questions about these payments. Mr. Granger, The charges against you are dismissed pending further investigation." He looked at Mirabel. "Miss Mercer, we'll need your testimony as well." "Of course," Mirabel said. Her legs felt like water, but she kept her voice steady. The crowd slowly dispersed, voices rising in speculation and outrage. Crane was led away by the sheriff, his face a mask of fury, and Mercer, finally, dismounted and pulled Mirabel into his arms. "You did it," he said roughly. "You saved me." "We did it," Mirabel corrected. She was shaking now, the adrenaline draining away and leaving exhaustion in its wake. "We saved each other." They stood together on the steps as the sun sank toward the horizon, and for the first time in 2 years, Mirabel felt like she could breathe. But the fight wasn't over yet. Over the next 2 weeks, the council investigated Crane's dealings and found a web of corruption that stretched far beyond Mercer's case. Crane had been systematically buying up water rights and coercing ranchers into selling at a loss, then reselling the land to Eastern investors for massive profits. By the time the full scope came out, half the valley wanted him run out of town on a rail. Mirabel testified twice, and each time she felt the weight of her past pressing down on her. She'd exposed herself to scrutiny. She'd made herself visible. And sooner or later, someone would start asking questions about where she'd come from and why she'd left. But the questions never came. Or rather, they came and stopped at the edges of her story. People saw a brave schoolteacher who'd risked everything to fight corruption. They didn't see an outlaw's daughter running from her family name. Maybe, she thought, because she wasn't running anymore. Winter settled over Eagle Ridge, cold and white and clean. Mercer worked from dawn to dusk, repairing his ranch and rebuilding the damaged irrigation channels. Mirabel helped when she could, spending her evenings at Red Mesa and riding back to town in the mornings to teach her students. It was exhausting. It was precarious. It was the happiest she'd ever been. One evening in late February, Mercer found her standing by the creek, watching the water run clear and fast over the stones. He came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, his chin resting on her shoulder. "I've been thinking," he said. "Dangerous habit," Mirabel teased. "I'm serious," Mercer said. He turned her to face him, his expression open and vulnerable in a way that still made her heart skip. "I don't want you riding back to town every night. I don't want to spend half my life wondering when I'll see you again. I want," he stopped, took a breath. "I want you here, with me. Always." Mirabel's throat tightened. "Mercer," she started. "I know it's fast," he said. "I know we've only known each other a few months. But Mirabel, I've never been more sure of anything in my life. I love you. I love your courage and your stubbornness, and the way you look at me like I'm worth believing in. And if you'll have me, I want to marry you." The world seemed to stop. Mirabel looked at him. This man who'd fought so hard to hold on to his land and his integrity. This man who'd seen past her walls and made her believe she could be more than her family's mistakes. She thought about the life she'd lived before Eagle Ridge, running and hiding and pretending. She thought about the life she could have now, rooted and real and full of love. "Yes," she said. And then, louder, "Yes." Mercer let out a shaky laugh and kissed her. And this time, it felt like coming home. They were married in April, on a clear spring morning with the whole valley blooming. The ceremony was small, held at the ranch with a traveling preacher and a handful of friends. Mirabelle wore a simple white dress she'd made herself, and Mercer wore his best shirt and a nervous smile that made her heart melt. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, the small crowd cheered, and Mercer kissed her like they were the only two people in the world. Afterward, they stood together on the porch of the ranch house, watching the sun climb toward noon, and Mercer pulled her close. "Happy?" he asked. "More than I ever thought I could be," Mirabelle said. She leaned into his warmth, feeling the steady beat of his heart against her back. She thought about everything they'd survived, the accusations and danger and secrets, and how they'd come through it not in spite of their pasts, but because they'd chosen to trust each other with the truth. "I used to think love couldn't last," she said quietly, "that it would always break under pressure. But you proved me wrong." "We proved each other wrong," Mercer said. He kissed the top of her head. "And we're going to keep proving it, every day for the rest of our lives." Mirabelle smiled and turned in his arms to kiss him properly. And in that moment, she knew with absolute certainty that she'd finally found what she'd been searching for all along. Not safety, not freedom, not escape. Home. The ranch prospered over the following months. Mercer's irrigation channels ran clear and strong, feeding not just his land, but his neighbors as well. The water disputes that had nearly destroyed him became a source of cooperation instead, with ranchers working together to maintain the system and share resources fairly. Mirabelle continued teaching, though now she rode to the schoolhouse from the ranch each morning instead of from her small rented room. Her students adored her, and the parents respected her, and if anyone ever wondered about her past, they kept it to themselves. On warm evenings, she and Mercer would sit on the porch and watch the sun set over the mesas, and he'd tell her about his plans for expanding the herd, and she'd tell him about the progress her students were making. Small, ordinary conversations, the kind she'd never thought she'd have. One night in late summer, as the cicadas sang and the stars came out like scattered diamonds, Mercer took her hand and said, "I never thanked you properly." "For what?" Mirabelle asked. "For seeing me when everyone else had already decided who I was," he said. "For believing I was worth saving. For loving me even when it was dangerous." "You did the same for me," Mirabelle said. She squeezed his hand. "We saved each other, Mercer. That's what love is." He pulled her close and kissed her temple, and they sat together in the gathering dark, listening to the night sounds and feeling the solid warmth of a future they'd built together, choice by choice, moment by moment. The past didn't disappear. Mirabelle's family name still carried weight back in Kansas, and Mercer's reputation still bore the scars of Crane's accusations. But those were old ghosts now, powerless in the face of the life they'd claimed together. They'd learned that love wasn't about erasing the past or pretending wounds didn't exist. It was about choosing each other anyway, day after day, through storms and calm alike. And on a spring morning exactly 1 year after their wedding, when Mirabelle told Mercer she was expecting their first child, he lifted her off her feet and spun her around, laughing with pure joy. And she knew beyond any doubt that they'd made the right choice. They'd chosen trust over fear. They'd chosen each other over safety. They'd chosen love. And in the end, that choice had given them everything.